I am not a registered investment, legal, tax, broker, or dealer. All opinions expressed by me are mine, my own, and how I trade, and my thoughts and my ideas. You need to consult your own professional, you need to do your own due diligence, and you invest your money wisely. Investing has risk. You will see. Do your own research, do your own due diligence. Don't hold me liable. I'm just expressing my own ideas. Do your own due diligence. So what's float soak? What's eating the float? Alright. Well, let's talk about it. So the first thing we got to understand is what exactly is the float. From Investopedia, the term float refers to the regular shares, common, a company has issued to the public that are available for investors to trade. This figure is derived by taking the company's outstanding shares and subtracting any restricted stock, which is a stock that is under some sort of sales restriction. Typically, you find out the float by visiting any of the profiles. You use Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Finviz. We're going to use LTNC because it's a good example of what eating the float is, but, they don't report. For example, if we wanted to look at Apple, there's the float. Alright. So what is the float again? This figure is derived by taking the company's outstanding shares and subtracting any restricted stock. Right? Outstanding, subtracting the restricted. Alright, pretty simple. Let's move on. Alright, so since LTNC doesn't report, we have to do some investigating. So the best thing we can do is start looking. So luckily LTNC still has this video up and we can listen to it. So we'll listen to it and we will take it.
How many shares will be out into?
How many shares will be out into? In the float, presumably?
Yes.
Okay. The actual float, depending on how you define it, I just assume that everything that's issued in the float, I think that's a safe thing to do. That's not technically true, but the amount that's not actually in the float would be pretty minute probably.
Okay, to me what he's saying is pretty much everything is in the float except for a very small portion of it.
Probably. Again, depending on your definition. So we have 7.8. As of now, we have 7.1.
Okay, 7.1 billion. So let's pull out our Excel spreadsheet. 7.1 billion. Alright, 7.1 billion.
And some change, and that's reflective of the 706 million shares that I've just destroyed. And I've still got somewhere around 2 billion shares personally, even after that burn.
So he says he has 2 billion. There's a newer SEC file we'll look at.
And I can't really elaborate anymore about the personal shares, but I hope that answered the question on the share count.
All right, there was.
All right, so that's the numbers we're going to start working with. So what we're looking at is LaborSmart, right? SEC search, nothing crazy. Thankfully, the SEC makes it super easy to see insider transactions. So we can go here. So we can see these are the insiders. She was listed as a 10% owner, 10% owner, officer, director. All right. So we kind of go down the list like this. Number of securities owned, thankfully they list this in descending order, so newest. So we can say this is the first number of shares that are currently owned. and we just kind of go down in order here. Alright, so to save time and cut the video a little shorter, you can, go down this list and, okay, so there's some restricted stock. So let's go back to his video.
How many shares will be out into?
How many shares are they out into? In the float, presumably?
Yes.
Okay. The actual float, depending on how you define it, I just assume that everything that's issued in the float, I think that's a safe thing to do. That's not technically true, but the amount that's
right. It would be pretty minute. It appears Dana, I hope I'm not mispronouncing it, only has 15 million and 7.1 billion. So this is pretty much all the common float, right? This is pretty much owned. Now, I still have issues with these numbers because of a recent tweet, right? So here's my recent tweet. What's my issue? He says he has 1.3 billion, not the 1.1. Let's just go off these numbers, the 1.3, because this is more recent than here. This is the problem when a company doesn't report. You have no idea what they're doing. So here we go. Here's our numbers of what we have. So what's the total numbers of the insiders that have shares based on, well, let me fix this number. All right, so we fixed that number. All right, so what's the total number float based on, what he's saying, 7.1 billion. Give or take. I don't know because they don't report. And then what's this right here? $1,470,000,000. I guess this is ridiculous. So anyway, what's the amount of the remaining float, right? So right, 5,600,000,000. All right, we got that number. All right. So what percentage is left? Whatever, I'll save time. Alright, so we pretty much got 81% of the float left, right? 81% remaining. Alright, now let's do my favorite thing. Pull up a chart. Alright, so here's our chart. So, where's the volume? Okay, so now we got to take these into account, right? I didn't think of much of these before, but now I do. So we have 945,848,580. Okay, let's add that number. So what we're going to do is take each of these volume spikes and add it to the spreadsheet. Just kind of cutting this short so the video is more interesting. You can debate if these numbers are exact or not. Can't pull the exact numbers, so we're going to just determine the ballpark and we'll go from there. So pretty close to 4,500,060,000,000. You don't even say these numbers. Over 4.5 billion was already assumed. So how much of the float is really left? Well, 64% was taken up, so you only have 35% of the float left on 2.8. Alright. What happened on 2.8? Right? That's when LTNC kicked off. Got another billion in volume, 1.6 billion in volume, and 1.1 billion in volume. Alright, so the float's gone. There's no float. Right? And what happens when there's no sellers? If there's no sellers, it's got to go up, right? If there's more buyers than sellers, price rises. If there's more sellers than buyers, price goes down. The float was gone here. I suspect the float was gone before 2.8. Or pretty much on 2.8 it went. Here's what eating the float looks like on an OTC, right? We already have so much of the shares going because of insiders. We have big buys, big buys, big buys, big buys. These in here is just accumulation. So you can assume another good percentage got eaten up in these lower volume bars. But what does eating the float do? Well, remember, if there's no sellers, price has to go up. So this is really small and really hard to see. So let's go in a little bit. So here's the volume on this day, right? Let's just put in our support line or our resistance line. Okay. Here's the next line, right? Because the float got ate up, price couldn't go back here. Float got ate up here, right? See how we're kind of in here, right? So it dips down, accumulates. When accumulation's done, right? When you see how this is a down day and the volume doesn't take this down, right? More volume doesn't take it down. Okay, it's accumulated. What happens? Next big vibe volume. So let's add our drawing. Right now, let's zoom back out just so we can look. Oh, well, see? So let's zoom back in. So these are the last days, right? So volume, boom, tries to take it up. Accumulate, 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 right? What are we looking for? We're looking for a down day with more volume, but the next green day goes higher with less volume. That means there's less float. If you ever have lower volume going in a certain direction, that means there is no buyers if you're going down, and there is no sellers if you're going up. Nothing crazy here, right? And so what do we have? 150 million down, and then 1/3 the volume takes it out. What does that mean? Right? If lower volume takes out higher volume going the opposite direction, there is no sellers. Right? There's no sellers to do this because there's 150 million. So we go through here. What does that signal? That signals the float is eaten. So what happens on 2.8? So here's our high line that we drew. 2.8, the float's gone. It can only go up. Can only go up. Can only go up until there's sellers. Can only go up. That is what eating the float looks like. You pretty much can't go down because there's nobody in here selling. So whenever they decide to sell, right? Whenever they decide to sell, right? Now you're in price discovery mode instead of eat the float mode. Price discovery looks like this. Eat the float looks like this. So since starting to record this video, Ryan was nice enough to get back to me. Still asking about the float. We saw in the video 7.1. I'm super confused at this point. But he says it's 8 billion. And, I just say I'm confused. It's 7.1 in the video. And then, that's one factor. But then, I ask about, where these additional shares come from. He mentions that he got them over 5 years, which would be since the time, I believe, since the time they stopped reporting. I asked to follow up about, is there any other insiders who have bought? And there's just no way to tell. So for what that's worth, you can follow up with the spreadsheet, right? So we turned to, we turned it to 8 billion, like you mentioned. So we went from 35 in the original number to 43% left. That's 43% with no long-term holders, with none of the consolidation dates. So in my opinion, these numbers are on the low end of things. You have long-term holders, you have the previous investors, you have, any new insiders that could be buying. It's so hard to tell with no reporting. That's one of the difficulties and one of the risks. And these numbers are only from the first of the year.